It is an honor to actually be here on the stage today. This is an opportunity that I don't think I would see myself in the last 10 years. But at the same time, I've been doing a lot of work with not only the members of my community in the emergency management world, my former teams with law enforcement and fire, and trying to figure out how we can solve some of the biggest challenges that we're running into, not just within emergency management, but also within law, fire, and into the military services as well. Intergenerational challenges are something that we are all facing. Some of the questions that were just asked of the previous speaker, being able to see how we're going to see the change within certain organizations where we have people that are coming in of different ages. As the last speaker talked about, being able to figure out how do we adapt? How do we adapt to change? Being uncomfortable. I couldn't ask for a better speaker to follow because there's just so much overlap. But I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this speech in a way where I'm going to take it from a different perspective, where we look at the intergenerational challenges and also come to it from the different angle of being able to talk about the importance of age, the importance of diversity of thought, the diversity of our members of our communities, and how we can use age and the diversity within our organizations to propel us to have more capacity for the next generation. And with that, as I started really looking at this talk, there was a little bit of me that really wanted to be the cynic, look at something and say there's 5 generations and this is nothing but challenges. Every single article that I researched, I looked at all the different things, and everyone had, from the Business Insider, Harvard Review, Pew Research, and everyone said, there's 5 generations, and there's nothing but challenges. There's nothing but, this group doesn't work well with this group, and as a manager, you have to deal with all of these different groups, and you're not going to be successful. And you have to figure out how you're going to deal with, your millennials or your Gen Zs who don't really interact well with the senior leadership in your organization, because they just do things a little bit different. And I kept reading at all these things, and I started realizing, everyone is talking about these challenges. Also, I like to say I'm an emergency manager, so I have to be an optimist. And so with that, when it comes down to the challenges that we see, not only within our organizations, but within our communities, there's also this moment where, although there are challenges, I know the people that are in this room are capable of being able to take that challenge and lead it on and actually find the solutions for the next generation. So with that, I like to say that I'm different. And a lot of people might see that and they go, oh my goodness. It's inherent for us to actually be able to do that. We see the differences that are happening throughout our organization. We see the differences within our communities, and there's days that we start really looking at the challenges that we're seeing, and we might just see a little bit difference between the members of our communities and who we are and the people that we serve. But at the same time, there's differences that are happening all over the place. And I'll take a moment of personal privilege just for a second to really just kind of highlight the differences as a means for me to really connect and show how I differ from where I work, previously working in law enforcement, the fire service, and emergency management, although my position is within a fire department. Many people from my neighborhood really did not move into professional services, working in cities. I grew up in Southern California, just outside of Compton. Compton, California, as probably many people in this room know, has a really good reputation. And so with that, a lot of people might see and they're like, where'd you grow up? How did you actually get out of those areas? And I take pride in where I came from. I love the fact that I'm from that area. I love the fact that I have gone through and I've seen different experiences. I see all the good that city has had. And with that, being able to know that where I've come from, that is a different perspective that I've been able to bring to the table. And when people come to me and they ask me about my experiences, I can go back and I can say, yes, you might see this on TV, but this is what I experienced. And look at where we are today. We are in the same place, sometimes in the same positions, depending on if we're working from different agencies. But also we're looking at different places where that person might have grown up in a place that is stereotypical to say they've come from a place of privilege. I also grew up in, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, I'm a younger person. So I grew up in the generation where we said, we're tired of putting tapes in, in the radios and downloading music, and we figured out a way to go through and break the system. Although that, some people might see that as a challenge, and I know that's probably technically illegal now, we started seeing that people that were coming into these generations just had a different perspective. They looked at things and they said, we want to be able to ask the question of why can't we get this a certain way? Being able to look at Napster and changing the way that we downloaded music. This is one of those things where people might be able to go back and say, although this is something that came overnight, it turned into other different mediums where people were stealing and getting viruses on many people's parents' laptops and things like that. It was just an opportunity for people to start thinking of other ways. And with that, we started seeing that other generations not only were dealing with music, but they started trying to figure out, how are we getting messages? How are we getting access to information? And we saw this boom, not only within the .com era, but as we started coming up in the generations over the 2000s, you start seeing people migrate to certain social media apps. And I know there's often times where we hear, people are saying, millennials only get their news from social media. And I say, yeah, that's okay. But are they going to a reputable source? Are they going to a location where they've seen the information that they're coming from news? Or are they truly getting their information from a friend of a friend of a friend? And so asking those questions and understanding the experiences that people are using to be able to say, I might be utilizing social media, but what tools, what methods am I actually using to actually receive my messages? Also, there's a lot of experiences that millennials might have gone through, and not only is it perceived, but what is their experience? A lot of the people that I grew up with and went to college with had opportunities to see their parents get laid off during the Great Recession. Being on the other side of that impact, there were so many things that we saw where coming out of high school and going into college, people were just thinking, I got my good break, I got this piece of paper that says I have a bachelor's degree and I'm ready to go. But what ended up happening is we saw that there was a significant collapse that no one could have predicted. Maybe a few people here and there that are, working in the banking company, but, not many of the people that were coming out of college. And with that, we started realizing that there were many people that had a different experience when they started getting their perceptions of the banking industry and also the economy. Like myself, I have an extensive amount of family that's also in New Orleans. I believe this is truly why I'm an emergency manager today. A lot of my family members have homes that still have watermarks in them. Being able to make sure that they have that momentum for themselves to show we survived through this. Having family come from New Orleans through Houston all the way to Los Angeles and stay with my family for so many months after Hurricane Katrina came through was very impactful for me. Although I lived halfway across the country, I had that impact of this directly on my life. And being able to say that I was not there, I wasn't old enough to be able to go out and be in the field and working with the Coast Guard or fire departments and all the resources that were pushed out in support of the city of New Orleans, I experienced something on a personal level that my perception drove me to make certain decisions in my life. Being able to know that my family had a direct impact, and when I can go back and we go back for fun and we go to Mardi Gras, but every day there's that moment where we walk into my great grandmother's garage and we look back and we see that watermark and we have that moment where we can see, you did make it, and you know what? It's nice to be able to be in this house and make sure that you were able to bounce back. And so that perception, that experience, is something that no one can take from me. That's not something that anyone can actually allow for me to build on. That I can build on by getting education. I had to have that experience directly with my family. So with that, I like to say that we're all different. Being able to go back and really talk about these things, I'm pretty sure every single person in this room has a reason that they are in the roles that they are in. The reasons might be different. You might not have a similar story. You might be able to look at some of the situations that I've highlighted and have a personal story of your own. but they're going to be different than what I've been able to provide. And so when I talk about being different in this space, especially in the world of Homeland Security, emergency management, law and fire, being different is not always something that's accepted. When we start looking at the paramilitary organizations, there's often times where we want to keep certain things in order. We want to keep those pillars and our institutions held up. Not only are they important for the integrity of our organization, but they are important for security. They're important for the safety not only of ourselves, but the members of the community that we serve. But at the same time, we also have so many different people that are coming into our organizations from different spaces, whether they might be a little older than they used to be, whether they are coming from different portions of our country. Our country is vast and it is diverse and it has so many attributes. And we have so many people that are now looking at different jobs and saying, you know what, I signed up to be, working as an accountant, but you know what, maybe I do want to take my shot at being in emergency services. I know that when that person comes over, I know that they're going to have a different experience than what anyone else who might have come in from college that has had their entire career being in emergency services. I know I'm going to get two different perspectives. So being able to take that difference is important. But the fun side of being different, we also have the people that are on the two different sides of the road. The Coke and the Pepsi. The people who are just like, yeah, we're on the different sides, we're not going to agree, we're not going to agree. That happens all the time. And when we start looking at our organizations, we're starting to see that there's a lot of polarized organizations that are starting to move into this space where people don't necessarily collaborate. I believe it was the Vice Admiral when she first started on the first day of Apex, where she mentioned the discourse that's happening and the discourse that's not happening. And being able to look at the challenges of trying to figure out why these people are not necessarily on the same page and why something almost so trivial becomes such a polarized issue within our organizations where people get into their corners and they're just not talking because they found this one thing that they're latching onto. And they're saying, you know what? I'm not going to be able to communicate with that person because I like Pepsi and that person likes Coke. Something as so simple as those things. Something a little bit more serious, some people who are baseball fans appreciate baseball season is starting to come back around. You have, the Yankees and the Red Sox where, I'll never go to that stadium. I'll never sit in that, I'll never set foot over there, or don't put Red Sox on me. These subtle things, we drive a lot of people into corners. And although there is a lot of differences that are ended up happening, sometimes they're easy to get over, but sometimes they're rooted in religion. Looking at things where people say, I believe the world or the earth is 13.8 billion years old. And then you have people that are saying 6,000 years old. And those conversations don't happen because people are not willing to find common ground with how they are working with each other. They might hear that someone believes 13.6 billion and somebody says 6,000, and they just write that person off and they're, you know what, I can't talk to you anymore. I'm done. When those types of things come into our organizations, we start seeing our pillars start to break down. We start seeing our capacity wane. We start seeing threats and vulnerabilities becoming more and more apparent because we are focused on these differences within our organization. We also have the subtle things. I appreciate all you guys that came across the East Coast, West Coast things. But also we have tradition and progress. And this is one of the biggest things that I see working in government service, where people are seeing that older generations, people have been with the organizations the longest. And some people who have come in from different paths are coming in and they believe in the tradition. They believe in the organization's values. And there's people that are also coming in that are seeing opportunities for progress. Not necessarily two different things. But when people are starting to look at these things and they realize that they're in two separate buckets, you start seeing some of these walls go up. So I go back to say that we are all different. And to me, when we start really looking at it, our differences are about our experiences. Not just about where we've come from, but it's also about our perceptions. We all might be able to remind ourselves of where we were on 9/11, where we were when Katrina happened, where we were on January 6th, whatever the event is, a lot of us, especially in this room, can remember where we were. But I challenge everyone to look at the next step of figuring out what perceptions and what experiences that you had with those individuals. Being able to share those stories. Those stories are the things that we might be able to rattle off. Yes, I was here at this time, and everyone's like, yeah, that's great. How did you feel about that? What actions did you take, or what actions did you not take? The perceptions that people have within our organizations are some of those follow-up questions. Being able to get to the root of how we build stronger agencies and institutions by having those follow-up questions about the perceptions and the experiences. And as we start looking at this, we'll be able to understand someone's expectations. And to me, this, my somewhat long career, this is the moment where we start really looking at expectations, and we don't really get to it because we get hung up on the differences that exist. And we never really have a chance to really talk about the expectations that many people have in our organizations. So we start looking at the different roads. And this is some of the challenges that I really want people to look at. Is the challenges that we are coming to, we are all coming down from different roads. The roads that we've used to get into these seats here, to get into the organizations, whether you have a gold badge or you wear brass on your collar, whatever your rank or title is, we've all had different journeys to get there. And a lot of people on the exterior, they focus on how we were able to move up the rank, but they don't necessarily ask those follow-up questions about how we were able to get there, the struggles that we had, the things that we needed to, sacrifice and or give in order to get to these spaces. And that's where we want to be able to make sure that we are telling that story as we get on these roads. So as I was really looking at all the fun stuff, I was trying to figure out how long is someone's career? And depending on what type of service that you're in, generally 250 days a year is how many days a person works. If you work a 40-year career, you're on day 10,000. And that was really painful. Because you start really thinking about that, you're like, there's 10,000 days, 10,000 experiences, 10,000 perceptions, 10,000 alarm clocks that go off. And when you start really thinking about that, it's an opportunity for you to think about all the 10,000 experiences that you will have over time. And being able to make sure that you can take that opportunity to go back, journal a little bit, write down those experiences. Because one day that those 10,000 experiences are going to be something that benefits the person who's on day one. Those day one experiences are sometimes some of the highest moments in our career. I can remember every single time that I switched jobs, because I'm a millennial and I've switched jobs a lot. But when it comes down to that, I can remember when I walked in, I was on cloud 9. I believed every single thing about the organization that I was told. I knew that there were so many opportunities. I was ready to hit the ground running. And I still have that drive. But I know everyone else that's within our organizations, they might not have that same drive as they had on day one. I can say I also don't have that same drive that I had on day one, because there's a lot of things that I've learned by having conversations with those day 10,000s. I've had those conversations and I've started to realize, you know what? I don't know everything. And that's okay. Because there's often times where we're starting to see the polarization that's happening within our organizations, where people kind of break away and they say, you know what, I don't really want to have conversations with those new people because they come with too many solutions already. They don't know what's going on. They're not sitting here willing to listen to what has happened. And you know what, they walked in and they said that they had a degree, so you know what, they know what they're doing, I'm just going to let them go. Take a moment and think about what that means in the event that so many people are making that same decision within their organizations. We start seeing that our organizations start to crumble. Those pillars that are those institutional values, whatever, if it's on the walls, if it's on the sides of your vehicles, if it's literally on your badge, we start seeing those crumble when we start seeing those divisive acts between people, because they say, I know what that person's about. We hit this day one versus 10,000. And we start seeing that our organizations are starting to pretty much separate themselves from the inside. where we have so many people that are seeing each other on the other side of the road and they're saying, I don't know what that person is doing, and frankly, I don't care. I'm not going to use the effort to actually start to collaborate with them. I'm starting to realize that, you know what, that person is always on their phone. I don't know what they're doing, but they're on their phone, and I know it's bad because I rather use a notebook. Instead of asking those follow-up questions, the perceptions of that individual override what that individual is actually doing. So when we start looking at certain things, I remember talking with one of my former colleagues, and he said, he looked and he was like, that guy's always on his Palm Pilot. Yeah. And I was like, all right, you gotta tell me a little bit more. And they're like, he was always on his Palm Pilot with a stylus. And I go, all right, what's the problem? And his argument was, well, he's not taking notes. So my follow-up question was, what is a Palm Pilot? Well, I learned that it's a mechanism to take notes. And when I started to have some conversations with people, I was just like, so what was the issue with him taking notes the way that he thought was beneficial for him? And it was just like, well, that's not how we do it. And I was really like, oh man, I feel like I'm gonna have that type of interaction at some point, where I'm looked at as being someone who's different and automatically put into the wrong. And not only is that going to have an impact on me, but that's gonna have an impact on how I perform within my organization. Also, how long I might stay with that organization. As they mentioned in the bio, I like to do speaking engagements from time to time. I don't know how I did it, but I'll do it. But I typically wear Jordans. It's just comfortable. I typically like to walk around, and I typically like to put on the shoes that are best for me. And I had one day someone told me, you're unprofessional. And I was like, wow, I'm unprofessional because of the shoes that I'm wearing on a stage because I'm walking around. It wasn't necessarily about the other 90% of what I was wearing and what I was saying. And we have that happen within our organizations all the time, where we start making assumptions, and we have this zero-sum game, where if one group of people start making changes, then someone automatically thinks that they're losing. I like to say that's not necessarily the case. And so it's easy to forget about the things that the lived experiences that people are having. And it's also very easy to focus on those differences. Whether it's a pair of shoes, whether it's a device, whether it's how they got the job, or what tools they use to actually do their job. It's easy for us to really look at all of those differences and see that they're wrong, when in reality, lived experiences are more valuable than those differences. So what I like to say in my organization, and also working with a couple of mentees that I have, is we cannot afford to build walls within our organizations, especially the people in this room. When we look at the security, when we look at the nation, when we look at the vulnerabilities, the new emerging threats, the walls that we are actually building by not allowing for people to have intergenerational collaboration definitely jeopardizes our ability to respond. And when we start seeing that we don't have as much conversation and collaboration, we're starting to see that people are moving into a space where they're saying, I did not understand that was a threat, or I didn't see that vulnerability because I did not want to talk to a certain individual. Or they did certain things a different way. I sent them an email even though I know that they prefer a Teams chat or something, and they didn't get the message. And all of those things start coming together where we start realizing that these walls have impacts on our ability to perform. So I like to go back to how we started and seeing all these differences in our organizations. And I like to say that this is a good time. This is a good thing that there's so many differences in our organizations, and it should be celebrated. As mentioned, it should be day 1 and day 10,000 paired up together. Because just think about all of the things that can be birthed from that collaboration. 2 different perspectives. A fire chief and a first rookie probationary firefighter. A senior commander, or the first day where someone is coming into the Coast Guard. Or in my realm, the director of emergency management and the specialist who just got their job. All of the things that we can talk about of not only just how you got here, but what you plan to do, what experiences I've had. I'm not on day 10,000, but I have more than 1,000 days. Each one of those experiences, I can start talking about all the different things that we can collaborate on. Also, being able to figure out how we can build for the next future. I also like to think that now is the most unique time in the workplace history, where we have 5 generations in one space. If we really take a moment to really reflect on that, not only have we not had 5 generations in a workspace, but we've never had this much institutional knowledge in our workspaces. Think about all of the things, all of the experiences that the highest generation in our workspaces had. They not only saw, depending on what generations you're in, it might be boomers, it might be traditionalist. These are some of the things where I might not have been able to experience those things, but I now have someone that I work with every day that might be able to tell the story of that situation. In the organizations that I work with, I hear about all of the different things about the Loma Prieta earthquake, the Berkeley Hills fires, all of these things from an operational from an operational perspective, because I know that the individuals that are still working with me experienced it firsthand. That informs some of the things that I can go back and plan for, because now not only did I could go back and read it, but I also had that personal experience to be able to rely on. And a lot of people see this time and they focus on the challenges and, we can't have meetings because this person doesn't prefer to be in the office, but this person prefers to be in the office all the time, and we can't have a meeting. But also, rarely are we focusing on the successes that can be made in the event that we are leveraging all the experiences, perceptions, and actual the expectations that those 5 generations bring to the table. And so I mentioned 5 generations. 56 million of those are millennials. What that equates to is a give or take about 35%. All of the things that people are saying about millennials, many are true, I will say. When it comes down to all of the things that are being said, one of the things that I always ask people is, are they assumptions or are they perceptions that you have about, or are they assumptions and perceptions, or did you get that information firsthand from that individual? Did you have follow-up questions with them? Did you ask them why this is their preferred method? Or did you ask them if they prefer to work from home on certain days, that, hey, this is my family and I've been struggling. Prior to COVID, I was struggling to keep my household afloat. And so this 1 or 2 days working from home has given me an opportunity to be able to sustain my life. Those follow-up questions are increasingly important because those perceptions and those assumptions are now things that we can talk about. Being able to bring those questions into your organizations are more and more important as we start going through, when we start looking at this 35%. This 35% is continuing to grow. There's actually numbers that show it's higher, upwards of 40. But what happens next when we start having the Gen Alphas coming into our organization and not only questioning the oldest generation, but also questioning the millennials that are here? Why are we doing this way? Why are we even having meetings? I don't know what their questions are going to be, but I know that they are going to challenge the institutions that we are seeking to establish and or uphold. And so as we start looking at those, I think it's important to really look at the traditionalists, or some people like to say the silent generation, give or take 1945 is a cutoff for that. This is the group that rebuilt after World War II. Being able to see all the things that they went through, the changes in the United States at that time. These individuals are still working, not only because some want to, some have to, but some also see that they still feel value within these organizations because of the institutions that have been built. These individuals are people who can clearly go back to and say, I don't know what it's like to be in your position right now, but can you tell me more about these things? The boomers that are also in our generation, although many are starting to retire, being able to really look at the boomer generation and understand, I don't know what it was like to have so many new children being born at one time. What was it like being in school? What was it like when you started seeing the professionalization of certain emergency services? People that are coming back from the war, having children and moving into, women being accepted in the workplace. People being able to say, now our diverse workplaces are starting to be a little bit more office-centric, a little bit more administrative, less on manual labor. That generational change is interesting because we're doing something very similar right now, where we're seeing a shift to automation. So being able to latch on to this group and say, can you tell me more about how that change impacted every single person in your family? Or can you tell me more about how you got into the field that you did? Why did you take up typing at such a young age when computers or typing didn't even show that it was going to be a thing? All of these questions allow for us to really go back and understand the different generations and also understand why they took the paths that they did. Gen X, they like to party. That's what I've heard. And so when it comes down to these things also, when you started moving into the professional services and started seeing, not only emergency services, but maybe military service, after all the wars, after, Vietnam, Korea, all the Cold War, you still saw people going into service. And I also really like to ask these questions, especially when you start seeing people that have made decisions to go down a path despite all of the headwinds that were coming towards them. People that were coming after, in Vietnam, people saying, this is anti-military, anti-establishment, anti-institution. But you had these people that said, I choose to still serve. Those are people that you really want to get a chance to sit down and talk with, to get a chance to understand. I understand that you did something that was against the grain. Can you tell me why? I really want to know because there's things that I will probably be doing in my career that I will likely be able to leverage that information. As a black man, I went into a police department in 2017. Many people in this room know that was a challenging time for law enforcement. And I chose to go into law enforcement at that time as a black man because I knew that there were some things that I wanted to do, and I was going to make sure that I had an opportunity to actually see those through. I knew that there was going to be a lot of pushback, but one of my mentors was someone who also faced those same challenges when they were actually going into the military after some of the Vietnam Wars. I had that opportunity to really talk, and I sat down and I really looked back and I was like, how did you know that you made the right decision? How did you know that you should have stayed? How did you know that you should have moved up into the organization? Or how did you know when to leave? Those are some of the questions that you can start really looking at. And millennials, I've harped on it a little bit, but being able to understand the technology and the things that they're looking forward to and some of the expectations and lived experiences. This generation, my generation, has had a run of it. It seems like just when everyone really starts to get their feet under them, something happens. After the Great Recession, you had COVID. After COVID, you had, we don't want to know. But when we start really looking at it, every single millennial is just very cautious. Lack of trust in institutions, lack of trust in government, lack of trust in each other sometimes. And when we start looking at it, we're putting our trust in things that are probably new. They're undermining a lot of core values. Not buying homes, asking people, why are you not buying homes anymore? Why are you not having children anymore? And start having those conversations and being able to understand what's happening next. Because the keys that we're going to be able to see is that the millennial generation is going to give us some insight into some of the changes, but also being able to have those conversations with the Gen Z, which I do not profess to know too much about them. So when we start seeing all of these challenges, it's easy to focus on them, but those 5 generations are easily equated with some of the challenges. And when we start looking at that, it's opportunities that we need to be focusing on. So I like to remind people, as we really start looking at these generational differences, see them as opportunities. Opportunities to learn from the successes, the failures, the experiences, and truly the most wide-ranging and diverse group that we've ever had a chance to work with. There's moments in time where it's, we might say, I'm in my leadership meeting and, that's where we make decisions. But also there's other generations that might be able to help make sure that those decisions are the best. So I start looking at this from a few different perspectives. The planning and research that goes on, and I'll speak specifically to emergency management. And with the research and the planning that we have going on, I started realizing that lack of conversation, that lack of coordination, the failures for many of the agencies that I've worked for us to be able to not really talk to each other, that has limited our ability to plan and research effectively. Because I know that there's many times where people have gone in and they start saying, here's your laundry list of things that you have to do. And I sit down and I go, okay, so am I the first person to ever have to do this? And they're like, no, it's been done. And I go, well, where's the last plan? Where's the document, the reference document? And they're just, it's on you, buddy. And I look back and I go, that slows down our ability to plan. That slows down my ability to really look back on some historical information, get the experiences of that last person, and understand why the document existed or maybe did not exist. Am I going to go step on the same landmine that somebody else did, a political one? And when we start really looking at all the things that we can build upon, there's opportunities where we can start saying, if I had somebody that I could connect with from a different generation and ask them about their experiences and ask them why they made decisions and did not make decisions, I can maybe make sure that the plans that I would draft are not going to make the same mistakes that they've made. In the space of readiness, I know many people, especially in this room, have really taken on jobs, and day one you are expected to perform. Whether you're an emergency manager in law enforcement, no one in the community cares if you're day one or day 10,000. The actions that we're expected to take are going to be the same. If someone calls 911, they expect that person to pick up the phone and be able to get the right resources to them without certain questions. And with that, we want to make sure that our institutions allow for those silos to be broken down to ensure that readiness is sustained within our organizations. Being able to look at the way that our organizations are structured to make sure that as we continue to build, we're not looking at people who are not ready when they sit down on that day one, but they are looking at people who have access to the information in the event that they need to be ready. Another moment of personal privilege, I started in the city of Santa Monica in 2020. Lucky me. And I started in January. And one of the first meetings that I had, my boss at the time, she goes, this is gonna be the biggest event that you have to deal with all year, the LA Marathon. All right, I'll take that. Couple plans, put a couple IAPs together, put together a couple of meetings. We open up a joint information center. We open up the emergency operations center. We have a multi-agency coordination center. We got everything. Everything that I studied was ready to go. And that was the thing that I was ready for because that's what I knew. Literally, within that same week that we were doing the planning, the first discussions about COVID started popping up. And I looked back at it and I was like, so about that pandemic plan. Oh, it's a paragraph, it's not a plan. It says we'll get it done, pretty much. The readiness that happened, the readiness that did not exist was because we did not have institutional knowledge being transferred from one person to another. There were no written plans. There was nothing that we could have really written out. And similar situations that many other emergency managers across the United States were dealing with. The lack of readiness. But I know that there was also a lot of people that had already seen emergencies of this magnitude. Maybe not on a global scale, but being able to talk with the people who saw the Ebola crisis, talk with people who have actually been overseas in the medical field, and they can talk about a little bit more about these things. And fortunately, we had someone in our organization that actually knew about this from a hospital perspective. And that moment where I could sit there and I could have that personal one-to-one conversation with that individual, I knew I was better prepared because I had an opportunity to really talk about what that experience was. I didn't care what kind of plans that they put together. Were you stressed out when this happened? Okay, all right, I'm not the only one. Were you able to get the resources that you need? Were you able to actually see people function and actually do their jobs in an effective way? And ask those personal questions to make sure that at the readiness that we were focused on, I was able to take that in and know, okay, I know this is going to be a tough go about, but I learned a little bit more because I asked follow-up questions to make sure that I had the readiness. The response type. There's been times in my career where I've interacted with a lot of firefighters, and this is no shade to firefighters. But there's been times where I've come in as an emergency manager and I want to say, you know what, let's put together our incident action plan. It's going to look like this on this digital platform. I'm going to be able to send a QR code to this group of people, and I'm going to do my resource request in this dashboard. And I'm going to be able to move information and share information. And one of my good friends, he is an ICS purist at heart. He comes into the EOC, we have everything up and cranking, and he goes, "Where's your T cards?" And I was like, "What are those, man?" He's like, "You know, the resource T cards, you pull them out, you give it to somebody, when the resource comes back, you put it back in the box on the shelf." I go, "I have a computer." These are not new. But what we realized is that although we had a really good relationship, we had never talked about our differences in the way that we view operations, how we view response. But I'd like to say, as we start moving into the next portion of this, is that relationship is what saved us. The communication that we had before saved us. We were in two different generations. This individual was a deputy chief and had been with the institution for more than 15 years. He knew what he wanted to do because it worked for him. And I knew that it worked for him, so I don't need to go and change that. And so we found common ground by sharing the experiences that we had from two different perspectives. I heard how these resources are great for fires, being able to manage incident resources, and I understood, and I saw his perspective. Likewise, over some scotch, actually, we sat there and we talked about, okay, well, this is how emergency operations centers work, and this is how we work efficient. And this is what happens when I actually don't get a chance to see that resource at a staging location. And he saw my side of the road, and we started looking at the way that we responded, and we said, you know what? This is a great time for us to merge these types of things. And this is the moment that we really had a chance to really sit down and come up with something that I think was pretty brilliant in the way that we ran the Emergency Operations Center in that jurisdiction. Being able to make sure that we had staging that in certain places had T cards, because that actually worked better when it came down to tracking that resource. Or there's other situations where we were able to scan stuff in and it popped into our incident management system, because those were the things that worked better in that space. But it was a consistent collaboration, that relationship from two different generations that came together and really saw, yes, there is a better way to do it. And progress doesn't have to come at the complete expense of one person, but it can come at a collaboration of our experiences to make sure that we're moving forward together. So there are some spaces where the instincts and the protocols, a lot of people talk about the OODA loop. Those things, not saying that we do away with those types of things. These things do save lives. And when we start looking at it, we just want to make sure that as we have access to these things, we're continuously refining our decision making. Our decision making, as we start collaborating with people across generations, being able to see and hear about different incidents, being able to see and hear about different experiences and bringing that into our decision making allows for us to have greater capacity as we go down the road. Being able to ask, what have we learned from these past incidents? And what can we take from these incidents and apply to the next incidents in the future? We don't want to make those same mistakes over and over and over again when we have a resource that's right here. Someone who can actually tell us about the last time that this thing happened. Being able to go back, and I go into some of my mentor that I have with the fire service. Being able to go and say, hey, if there's a fire that happens on this mountain, Like, how would you respond? He goes, don't worry about how I would respond. I'll tell you exactly where that fire is going to go. It's going to go up, it's going to go to the left, and if the winds are coming from a certain direction, it's going to go to the right just a little bit, and then it's going to go back to the left. Okay, all right. That institutional knowledge I could not have picked up in any map that I would have developed. Any GIS tool at the moment, I don't know if they're developing those types of things, but any GIS tool that I would have mapped, I would have put this thing out and I would have said, okay, the fire is going to go somewhere over here. But being able to leverage the relationship of that different generation, that person had been in that position for a very long time, to be able to go back and say, I've seen this not once, but twice, but 3 times. And I know you're probably going to see it not once, but twice, but 3 times. Here's my knowledge. Here's what I have. Here's how you can build for the next steps. And bring in some bring in some new knowledge to say, how can we refine this to make this better? So I like to kind of go back and, why did I get to this point where communication was really the crux of how we build capacity? It's not something that we really talk about. A lot of people really leverage, I need more resources, I need more money, I need more staff. Those are the things that we do. And I say, yeah, shoot your shot, buddy. Half of the time we'll get it, half of the time we won't. But we're still going to need that information. And it's not a secret, it's Black History Month. And so with that, I think it's important to really kind of think about, and this is not something that's specific to Black Americans, but multiple generations have multiple races and ethnicities have this happen, as well as the art of storytelling. The art of being able to go back and tell stories and exchange information across generations in the absence of documentation, in the absence of being able to have a written record or something that we can actually rely on and say, oh, I know exactly what happened. When we start looking back back through United States history, specifically with Black Americans, they had the art of storytelling because not only did they want to share a story, but they wanted to build culture. They wanted to build tradition. They wanted to make sure that intergenerational collaboration and respect were built upon each other. And they looked at and they said, one of the best things to do is for us to make sure that we are telling our story. Being able to realize that those stories not only change the way that change the actions that the youth made, but they informed them so that they understood the why. And that's whereas a lot of millennials, you'll typically, and this is one of those other things that is funny, truly funny to me, that millennials are technically Generation Y. But when it comes down to it, people want to understand the story. They want to understand the experience. And being able to have those moments where they are sharing stories from one person's perspective, from one person's culture, from one person's journey, that informs that next generation so they can sit there and they can hear it firsthand and go, I'm not going to make that same mistake because I heard my grandmother did that. Or I heard my uncle did that and it didn't work so well. Or better yet, I was able to go back and I was able to hear why this institution is the thing that we should uphold the most. Instead of it just being something that's written down, there's context to it. And these are the types of things that I've looked back and I go, every culture that I've really interacted with, I can see that they have a variation of this. Where the people, the elders of the community are sitting down and they're saying, here's the story of what happened. Here's how we got here. Something as simple as me asking my parents, why was I born in this hospital and not that hospital? That story allows for me to understand more and more. And as we start realizing that we are not doing this as much as we should within our institutions, we start looking at how we are regressing by not having these conversations. This is happening not only in our communities where people are not collaborating and talking, where everyone gets home and they pull into their garage, they shut their garage, they don't know their neighbors, and when something happens, everyone's like, I don't know. The capacity of those neighborhoods comes because we're not having conversations. We've also lost this art within culture, within our Black communities where we don't have those conversations as much. We're starting to see that we are having this happen within our organizations where we're not having conversations as much. As we start breaking down these pillars of conversation and working together and collaborating with each other, we are going to see that as institutions that we will crumble. And I believe, again, I can't recall which speaker it was, but some of the communication that we are not having has real world impacts. Not being able to share the full story allows for that vacuum to exist where people can come in and they can say, well, if I don't know the full story, I'm gonna make one up and I'm gonna figure it out myself. And so with that, being able to leverage the history that we all have in our families, being able to tell the stories of why things have happened a certain way, sharing that institutional knowledge, but also being able to leverage things that we know work. Being able to say, we've seen the history, we've seen how people have been able to share stories and being able to connect. Therefore, as we start looking at this, connecting generations early and often, whether it's in our personal lives or within our organizations, it helps build culture. And I specifically start with culture because as we start looking at this, all the changes that are happening within our organizations, a lot of people are saying it's changing our culture. It's changing our ability to perform. It's changing how we operate. And with that, we want to make sure that we can connect our generations so we can help with building that culture. So we don't take those steps back. We build trust within our organizations. As we start talking about who is in the room and who can have trust with each other, those conversations that happen, whether they are happening at the senior level and that day one level, being able to connect with those individuals allows for me to build trust. I don't necessarily need to know every single thing that's happening at the executive level, but if I'm a day one person, I just want to, be able to understand why as I continue to maintain that high functioning, high level drive that happens within in my life. But also being able to maintain that early institutional knowledge, being able to say, yes, here's your task, but also here's some background. And here's some of my experiences that I've had with those things. A lot of people would just hand off the piece of paper and say, go ahead and do the job, and they come up with something, and the feedback is, yeah, that's not the right way to do it. But if it came with all these other things, the institutional knowledge, those conversations, we were able to have those conversations early and often, we're gonna start seeing that people are able to maintain that institutional knowledge over years. And when I'm on day one, what I learn on day one can still continue to be valued on day 5,000 and day 10,000. And it's my goal to make sure that I give that to the next person that's coming into our organization. Without the trust, without culture, without institutional knowledge, our organizational capacity is going to be limited. And as we start looking at this, we're going to start seeing these fractures that are happening. And if anyone here is in administration, when you start seeing those fractures happening, that takes the time away from you to do your work. When you're having to deal with administrative actions, doing write-ups and doing evaluations that should be, one page that says you're doing everything good. Now it's I have to document every single thing that this person has done wrong. You start seeing your capacity starting to be limited. What are we also seeing when we start having that being taken away from every single line staff member or your supervisors that are also supposed to be doing those things? We are starting to realize that our organizational capacity, as our culture starts to crumble, as our trust starts to crumble, our capacity to be able to perform the duties that we are there to do also starts to crumble. So when we start looking at all of the spaces that we're in, I think it's important to look at other fields and seeing not only how we're supposed to be able to, how should we do things in our offices, but also how can we see our space improve based off of the work that other people are doing. And I think the commander, Samson, I believe, yes, thank you, mentioned getting uncomfortable, 100%. And this is the nexus between the last conversation is we have to get uncomfortable, and we have to be able to be uncomfortable to face these new challenges that we're going to run into. And so some of the things that I've worked with, and I've done this in my personal life, is the reverse mentoring. Although I'm in an executive position, I have a mentor that is, or a mentee that is, well, actually he is my mentor, who is younger than me. He has been in the field way less than me, but it's the goal for me to be able to understand more about what he's going through to better inform how I make decisions. As I can go back and I can go and say, at a policy level, this is what I do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I make the same decision every time. But I've actually had some good information from my mentee that says, hey, you know what? That don't work. And those are the types of things that I can only get by having those connections and those real conversations with the persons, the people that that are mentoring me. Although we are very close in generations, we are separate generations. And the way that that individual works and implements their role and their responsibilities helps me understand a little bit more every single day. And so as we start seeing that intergenerational mentorships have benefits, they go beyond the ability for us to be able to say, I understand what I did, but also what's new. It allows for me to see what's coming, what decisions I might need to change based off of the activities, the expectations that are coming in from different generations. But also I talk about, I'd like to recommend that people go back and see about these academic practitioner collaborations. There are more institutions where people that are in college or any type of research institution, they're hungry to collaborate with government agencies and private sector. And what they want to do is they want to take that research that they just got hot off the press, that their PhD person started to, their advisor signed off on, they want to see it enact. I encourage people to take these opportunities to be able to collaborate with new people coming out of the research field. And the reason I say that is because they're looking to be proven wrong. They took this paper and they're saying, you know what, does this work? Because they want to go back and they want to do the best research possible. But being able in our organization to be able to collaborate specifically for us with UC Berkeley is being able to get additional information to go back and say, hey, we've been doing this for 20 years. Does this actually work? And I've heard a lot, they're like, no, that doesn't work. And I go, that makes sense. I've felt like it was falling on deaf ears. But that research, the collaboration between the new people that were coming in, the research that they have time to do that I do not have time to do, the validation that they were able to provide to say, hey, here's a better path for you to take. Their experience, their information allows for me to be a better emergency manager because I have opportunities to connect with other people. I also like to talk about emeritus status, and this is something that really people look at in colleges and universities. When someone retires, and I know a lot of fire chiefs have this, which I think is excellent, somewhat, I have less information about how this happens in other institutions. But once that person retires, do they take all of their knowledge with them? They don't have to. And being able to say, you know what, I want to make sure that you have a door when you retire. I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to come back and share your experience with people from time to time. I want to make sure that you know that you can be a resource. Maybe I don't need to pay you, or you can volunteer your time. I know that doesn't work in every institution. But it might be an opportunity to allow for that information to continue to flow into that organization. By being able to look back and go, hey, I know you were the chief at that time. Can you tell me why this is the path that you took? And that allows for it to flow down into that organization to keep everyone engaged and ready to go. So I typically like to go back and ask, like, have you ever started that position where you wish you had more information? You might have had this be your desk and you're like, I wish there was more stuff on it. Or there's just no computer, therefore whatever is on this desk is all that I have. These are some of the things that I want to make sure that we continue to make sure we have the ability to pair our day ones and our day 10,000s. The capacity building that we can get with pairing not only the day ones and the day 10,000s, but the people in the middle of that. The day 20s and the day 100s, being able to see how we can have this intergenerational conversation happening at multiple levels of our organization. Whether someone is a supervisor and they've been in that role for 20 years, they have seen so much of how that operation works. Or maybe they're a manager and they're new and they can learn from that supervisor that's been there for 20 years. There's all types of pairings that can happen to help better serve our organization by having that constant collaboration. We want to build on the experiences, not only just of the perceptions, but the diverse groups that we have. Especially if you have organizations where you have people coming from all over the country. There are things that brought all of these people here to those tables, and being able to leverage that information, ask them why you are here and what are your expectations. We want to continue to build on that so we have less reliance on those empty file cabinets and memos. Those opportunities where we have those conversations over coffee or scotch or whatever your drink is, those are the things that we can allow for those conversations to thrive. We have the opportunity for increased positive discourse. Being able to say, okay, I know that I can go into that person's office from time to time and just bounce something off of them no matter how high or below me they are. That's those opportunities where people start feeling comfortable with being wrong, but also being right. And being able to push a narrative or push something into the next phase where they can get some more information. They also have that opportunity to understand the why, but you as a leader have the opportunity to explain the why. And also being able to explain that is invigorating. Being able to make sure that as I go back and I ask why I was doing this, on day 1 I might not have given you the same answer, but on day 5,000 I might give you a different answer about that why. And so it's a great exercise in us being able to question ourselves and make sure that we are still in it for the right reasons and we are still doing the work for the right reasons. The trust that we can build with that. As I mentioned, the deputy fire chief that I had, we had so much trust with each other that to the point where we called each other on first names. We were sitting here, we would be in meetings, and people knew that even though we were coming to the table from different perspectives, everyone knew that we weren't in disagreement. We were truly trying to find a collaboration with each other to find a better solution. And that trust collaboration allowed for new ideas. Being able to come from different perspectives, different ways to understand. I understand what has happened over the last 10 years. Here's what I will do over the next 5 years with this new information. And then, I know a lot of people say this, asking informed questions. Being able to come back and know that although I'm coming from a perspective where I might be in my first 100 days, I now have informed questions that I can be able to provide to my executive team because I have the opportunity to see what has been done right in our organizations, and also I have that information to allow for me to ask better questions when I have those opportunities to meet with my mentor or the person who is in the executive level position. Once I make those informed questions, I have the ability to make informed recommendations. These are the opportunities where we start seeing the growth within our organizations, the capacity that is able to be built based off of the information that I've acquired, not of my own, but of the resources that I've been able to have within all the generations within my office, whether they are above me, whether they're below me, whether they are the same. Everyone's experiences allows for me to make better informed recommendations and decisions, and that allows for me to be a better staff member for our groups. But I like to say that the best part of this, when those disagreements do happen, people laugh. They don't yell at each other because they know that they've made trust within that individual because they've had those conversations. They're no longer polarized in this weird space of Coke versus Pepsi because they know we're all talking about soda. And they see that common ground so much easier when they've had those routine conversations, no matter what generation they're from, no matter what experience they're from. Historically, I found myself in a debate team, and politically, I was paired up with someone who was on a completely different side of the road than I was. We are best of friends till to this day because we have those conversations where we were forced to come to the solutions together. We had these opportunities where we had a chance to learn about someone's perspective. And I know in the MPS program, we have those tough discussions, and we might not always come to an agreement. But we can have that discourse in a way when those disagreements happen. I trust you enough that you're not going to steer me astray, and we will come to hopefully a better solution. When we start really looking at these, institutional knowledge, it keeps things flowing. When we start seeing that we have those breaks, those cracks in our institutions, those pillars that are no longer there, those memos that are the only thing that we have, we start realizing that we are slowing down. But what we have is this institutional knowledge allows for us to leverage the information from our senior executives, the people who have been with the organization for the longest time, and it keeps that momentum going. So building capacity in just a couple of slides before I close. Institutional knowledge brings that innovation. When I know of all the successes, those areas of improvement, those potholes, whatever I've run into or whatever someone else has run into, coupled with the institutional knowledge that I might be bringing from my life, my personal life, the academia, wherever I'm bringing it from, this births innovation. And when we start looking at the innovation that we need for the new and emerging threats of today and tomorrow, that innovation allows for us to make sure that we are collaborating with people every single day who have seen things, who might know the fire goes up to the left and back to the right depending on the wind. That allows for me to understand if this system is good enough, or should we enhance it, or should we make other decisions to come up with something better, because I have that knowledge, and that institutional knowledge allows for me to birth innovation. Time becomes opportunity. As I mentioned, when we start looking at how much time we are spending on correcting or building relationships within our office because of the fractures, people go into their corners and they don't talk to each other. I look at the time that we're losing and the capacity that we are losing in those spaces. Therefore, I look at time as an opportunity for us, where I can go back to my staff and I can say, yes, I have time to talk to you. Yes, I have time to be able to look at something that's new and emerging, because I'm not worried about all these things that are breaking, because I know that I've allowed for collaboration and conversations to happen in a space where people know that those routine conversations allow for time to now be a privilege for us. Be able to say that we have the time to go back and take on those new projects. Belonging is a strength. As we realize where we are, a lot of people are leaving organizations all the time. And as mentioned again, people don't quit jobs, they quit people. And when we start seeing that happening within our organizations, when people stop feeling they don't feel like they belong in an organization, they don't feel heard, they don't feel like their voice is respected, they walk out and they go, I'm done, I'm good. If we can embrace the belonging within our organization by giving people a chance and a space to have their voice be heard, we strengthen our organization. And strengthening our organization allows for us to be more resistant of all of those headwinds. So if we have that one employee that comes in that is truly toxic, we have the strength to resist that toxicity from that employee because of all the things that those employees are collaborating on. Being able to exchange those historical narratives, so when that employee comes in that might be toxic, they can go, you know what, I actually don't fit here because this group they're tight and I'm not breaking that. Appeal. A lot of people are having a hard time with recruiting and retention right now. Conversations, as I just mentioned, allow for us to have a new level of appeal, which turns into a new level of legacy. As we start realizing that a lot of our institutions, people are seeing this catastrophic change, and they're going, I can't do this anymore in this organization. We want to be able to uphold the legacies of our institutions. And then well-being. If I'm willing to come to work every day, I don't take off those days from work. If I know that I can go to a staff member and share information with them, I can bounce ideas off of them. I know that I'm not going to just be doing, tasks over and over and over and I not know the purpose. My well-being will be built up. And with that, that's my readiness. And this is to me the cybersecurity, the homeland security thing that is very important. When we start burning out our staff and taxing our staff and not allowing for them to feel valued within our organizations, our vulnerabilities increase. Those threats, those things that would have typically gotten caught, now are getting past us. And now we're going to have to respond to these things because of the well-being of our staff members. We have people that are willing to engage and willing to be here. So those new endeavors, the conversations that we can have can become our new normal. Those new endeavors, being able to move into new spaces because we have that added capacity, that is the space that I encourage everyone to move into. Whether you do a mentorship, whether you're doing a reverse mentorship, or you're bringing in those collaborations from students from college and university institutions, those are the new endeavors. That's how we change bridges. That's how we build new and innovative things. And so with that, being able to take the next step in where our organizations are going, whether it be the capacity of our organizations or the new things that we can innovate, We want to be able to capitalize on that by having those conversations with our staff members on both sides of our generations to learn what's new, but also what has happened in the past. And so when we promote these ideas, those critical resources, our experiences, lessons, and information, we have that capacity. And I know I've seen it, and I've felt it myself by having that new capacity where I've been able to go back and talk to staff and mentors that are younger than me. And I can go, you know what, I was doing this all wrong. And now I can go back and make better decisions so I can take that information and build the right way for the future that's coming behind me. So my appeal, no matter what rank you are, no matter what age, what agency, I encourage everyone to find a person. It doesn't matter how old they are. It doesn't matter what field they're in. It can be a personal connection. It can be a professional connection. I encourage everyone to go back and find a person from a different generation and learn from them. What you choose to learn from them is up to you. But what you choose to get and the opportunities that can be birthed from that collaboration, I can promise you they will be beneficial. Ask that person, what can we learn from each other? You know, no matter what our rank is, I want to be able to learn something from you. I want to know about coding that's coming down the pipeline. And you want to know about how I got to my position. Those are things that we can exchange to make sure we can have that intergenerational collaboration. What brought you here? Is it different than what brought me here? Is it because my parents were in the fire service and your parents, you just saw a good job opportunity? Whatever that is, let's discuss that. How are our paths different? How are they similar? Building those collaborations is important for us to be able to inform ourselves. And then what were those experiences that you learned from? What were those lessons? What were those errors? What were those things that you were like, I will never do that again? So in closing, I like to go back and say, communication is the thing that we've had throughout our history. Throughout our history, we've shared stories, we've shared traumas, we've shared positive impacts that we've had. We've shared the lessons that we've seen, whether it's in our professional, personal lives, what's brought us to this room, what's brought us to the position and or rank. Being able to share that intergenerational story with the person that's on their day one is one of the most impactful things that you can do to build the capacity within your organization. And so with that, I want to say thank you very much for your time. It was an honor to be here. It's an honor to meet with all of you. And so thank you.